They said she was a ghost of the past, not because she was old, not because she wandered the fields at dusk in silence, but because she never left, never changed, never gave up on a promise everyone else had already buried. Every Sunday evening, she walked out to the field behind the red farmhouse with a bundle of pink roses and a heart that had learned how to wait without hope. Her name was Eleanor May, and once a long time ago, she had loved a man in uniform, Sheriff Luke Callahan. He promised her a house, a porch swing, a quiet life. Then he vanished. No goodbye, no letter. Just a storm one night and a gunfight nobody would explain. They said he was dead. Some whispered he ran. But Eleanor never believed either story. She just kept waiting, because love doesn't always need proof. Sometimes it just needs time. And 17 years later, as the sun set over the same field where she once said yes, the man she never stopped loving finally came back. But he wasn't alone, and he wasn't just carrying guilt. He was carrying flowers. The letter wasn't hidden well. It was tucked inside the old Bible that Eleanor kept on the shelf. Not because she read it often, but because it had been his, Sheriff Luke Callahan's. She dusted it once a week, flipped it open sometimes when the ache was too loud in her chest. But she never thought to check the back cover. Not until the binding cracked on a warm June morning and a piece of folded paper slipped out like it had been waiting all these years just for her fingers. She stared at it for a long moment. Cream-colored, edges yellowed, ink faded. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Just a single word at the top, May. Her heart dropped like a stone in a still lake. She didn't read it at first. She couldn't. She made tea with shaking hands, set the cup down twice because she forgot she'd already poured it. Then she sat in the same chair by the window, the one that faced the pasture and the distant gravel road, and unfolded the paper like she was unwrapping a wound. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, upright. Luke's. But it wasn't a love letter. It was a confession. May, if you're reading this, then you found what I didn't mean to leave behind. I didn't die. I ran, not from you. God knows, never from you, but from a man who came to our town with money and blood on his boots. I couldn't arrest him, couldn't touch him. He bought the mayor, bought the judge. So he made me choose. Stay and get you hurt, or leave and stay gone. I chose wrong. Every day since, I've thought about coming back. But every time I got close, someone from that man's circle made sure I remembered what they could still do to you. And I couldn't risk it. I just hope you lived. I hope you loved again. I hope the house we dreamed of became real, even if it wasn't with me. Luke. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Each word carving opened a piece of the past she thought had long gone cold. He hadn't left her. He had saved her. At least he thought he had. But no one had come after her. No one had threatened the farm. She hadn't been hunted, only haunted. She looked out the window. Same porch, same field, same sky. He had vanished into shadows while she had stayed visible in the light. For him. That evening, she walked to the back field with the letter in her pocket and the roses in her hand. She didn't place them on a grave. She placed them on the fence post where he first kissed her, 17 years ago, after asking her if she believed in forever. She did then. She still did. But now that she knew the truth, what was she supposed to do with it? The next morning, something changed. It started with hoofbeats, not from town, not from the trail, from the east side where nothing came except storms and strays. She stepped onto the porch and saw the dust cloud long before the shape. A rider, tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, moving slow, like someone who'd rehearsed this return every night in his dreams and still didn't believe he deserved to live it. Eleanor's heart stopped because she knew that walk, that lean, that impossible stillness in the chaos of wind and heat. It was Luke, older, thinner, but him. He stopped 10 paces from the house, didn't dismount, didn't wave, just tipped his hat, like they hadn't lost 17 years, but just 17 hours. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't run to him. Instead, she stepped forward, slowly, carefully, and said, You forgot your Bible. He smiled barely. That Bible saved me more than once. You never sent that letter. No, he said. I wrote it 100 times. I just never had the guts to deliver it. Well, she said, crossing her arms. I delivered it to myself yesterday, without warning. I figured that out when I saw the roses. She raised a brow. You been watching me? For years. A silence hung in the heat. He dismounted finally, stepped forward. I didn't think you'd still be here. I didn't think you'd still be alive. Another pause, then. Why now? Luke looked past her toward the house. He's gone. The man who kept me running. Shot in Kansas last winter. I saw his name in a bounty notice. For the first time in 17 years, I had no one chasing me. She didn't speak. He stepped closer. May, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a place. But I had to come back and see if you were still you. She nodded. I am. Are you alone? She tilted her head. You're here, aren't you? He swallowed hard. I brought something. She blinked. What? He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a bundle of pink roses, fresh, still cold with morning dew. Figured after 17 years, he said softly. I should bring flowers this time. She took them, not with joy, not with tears, but with a quiet grace born of years that taught her how to survive silence. She smelled the roses, then looked up, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, she smiled. Eleanor had only seen 3 men walk like that in her life. One was her father, coming back from war with a limp and a silence no prayer could fix. One was a man she never named, the one who broke her heart when she was too young to know what breaking meant. And the third was Luke Callahan. That gait, calm but ready, proud but careful, was burned into her memory like the smell of ash after a barn fire. It was the walk of a man who'd buried too much, carried too far, and still chose to return. Even when he didn't think he had the right. Luke sat on the porch swing with one hand wrapped around the armrest, the other holding a cup of coffee she'd poured in the old tin mug with the chip near the rim. She hadn't asked him to sit. He hadn't waited to be invited. And somehow it felt like they'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. Except they hadn't. 17 years had passed. Entire lifetimes. Wars, birthdays, winters without a fire warm enough. But the porch was the same. The house still stood. And so did the silence. Do you remember that summer before I left? He asked, not looking at her. I remember everything, she answered. Even the part I tried to forget. He nodded. We talked about building a fence around the pasture. You bought the wood. I painted the boards. You never nailed a single one in. He smiled faintly. Didn't want to trap anything. You trapped me just fine, she said softly. Inside, the clock ticked loud enough to feel like judgment. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first dry scent of cut hay from the fields. He watched it. That breeze. That space between them. There were days I thought about writing, he said. Why didn't you? Because I figured the silence might be safer than the truth. You thought silence would protect me. He nodded. And in that silence, she said, you left me to bury you alive. He flinched at that, not visibly, but she saw it. The way his fingers tightened around the mug, the way his jaw moved, just once. I didn't know, he said, that no one came after you, that you were left alone. I thought I was protecting you. She stepped onto the porch. Leaning against the post, arms folded, she looked at him like someone trying to find the shape of an old melody in a new song. You did protect me, she said, from everything except the not knowing. They didn't speak for a while after that. The wind took over. Birds called in the far trees. Somewhere a gate creaked loose on a hinge. And still they sat like the whole world had narrowed to the distance between a wooden porch and 2 broken hearts. He sipped the coffee. She watched the road, and the past hung between them like smoke. Later that day, she brought out an old box from the back of the pantry, set it on the porch table without a word. He opened it. Inside, a tin star, a dried rose, a photograph of them on the 4th of July, the year before he disappeared. You kept all this? He asked, stunned. I kept everything, she said, because throwing it away would have felt like admitting you never existed. He picked up the star, turned it in his hands. You were a good sheriff, she said. He looked up. I wasn't good enough. You were young. He nodded. That was the excuse. The truth was, I was scared. The afternoon stretched long. They walked the field together once, slowly. No words, just the crunch of dry grass under their boots and the feeling of 1,000 untold stories in the air. He stopped near the old fence line, the one they'd never finished. I thought I'd come back and it'd all be gone, he said. She looked at the house, the barn, the line of trees beyond the ridge. It almost was. Twice. What stopped you from leaving? She looked at him. You. That evening she made dinner. He offered to help. She let him peel the potatoes and he did it clumsily, cutting them too thick. You never did learn this part, she teased, too busy trying to learn how to leave. They sat at the table as the sun dipped low. Neither of them said it, but they both knew this meal mattered, because meals were things you shared with people who were staying, not with people passing through. Afterward, he helped her wash the dishes. The way he wiped the plates, she could see it in his hands. This wasn't just a visit. It was a man trying to remember how to belong. As darkness fell, he stepped back onto the porch and sat on the swing again. She followed, blanket in hand, sat beside him, close but not quite touching. He stared up at the stars. I watched over you, he said quietly. She turned to him. What do you mean? I came through town twice a year, bought supplies, asked around, never said my name. You were here? I never left completely. I just stayed outside the firelight. She swallowed hard. That's not watching, Luke. That's haunting. He nodded. Maybe, but I couldn't not look. Not once. The swing creaked again. She rested her head back against the beam. Why now, she asked. Because you never gave up on me, he said, and I finally realized that's what I've been trying to earn. And I'm not there yet. She looked at him. No, she agreed, but you're not running anymore either. He met her gaze. For the first time in years, they saw each other fully. Not as they had been, but as they were. Older, bruised, but still standing. That night, she left the door unlocked. Didn't say anything about it. Didn't have to. He slept on the porch again, same swing, same blanket. But this time, he dreamed of a house that hadn't moved on, and of a woman who'd never let go. Luke had never been good at saying things straight. Even when he wore a badge and carried a gun, he spoke in fragments, half-truths, half-sentences, and full silences. But now, sitting in the same kitchen, where she used to cook for two and then for one, he knew it was time to say it all. It started over coffee, again. But this time, he didn't reach for the mug. He folded his hands and looked down at the worn wooden table like it might collapse under what he was about to say. Eleanor sat across from him, still, watching, waiting. He breathed in, then started. The man who came to Chariot back then, his name was Donovan Crane. Her breath caught. You never told me a name. I didn't dare, he said. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a shadow. Owned railroads, banks, half the lawmen in the county. He looked at her, and he wanted me out of the way. Why? She asked. Luke's voice dropped. Because I wouldn't let him hang a boy for a crime he didn't commit. He wanted to set an example. I got in the way, made enemies. Who was the boy? His name was Jesse Harlan, 15, had nothing but a slingshot and a smile. Did you save him? Luke nodded once. Got him out of town on a freight train, right before Crane's men torched the blacksmith shop looking for him. Eleanor's hands tightened around her mug. I remember that fire. We thought it was an accident. I know. Luke stood, paced once, stopped at the window. He sent a man to your door that same night, he said. Not to hurt you, just to show me he could. Eleanor blinked. I never knew. You wouldn't. The man never knocked. Just stood by your barn. I saw him from the ridge. That's when I knew what he was capable of. She looked down. And so you left. I left, he said, his voice cracking. To save me. To lose you, he corrected. I thought they'd stop watching you if I disappeared. That they'd think you were just a girl I left behind. And did they? He hesitated. Yes. He turned around fully now, leaning on the counter like it was the only thing holding him up. But I didn't. I stayed close. I came back every 3 months, sometimes more. Why? To see if you were alive, to see if I was forgiven. You didn't ask. I didn't dare. Eleanor rose slowly, crossed to the small drawer beside the sink. She pulled out a tin box and opened it. Inside, 23 matchsticks, all burnt halfway down. She held it out. I lit one every time I thought I'd never see you again. Luke stared. She continued, and I only stopped because I didn't have any more to burn. He looked away, because if he didn't, he'd break, and he couldn't afford to break. Not now. You were in danger, he said again, softer this time, even if you didn't see it. And you think I was safe, here alone on this land, with rumors of you running off and everyone calling me a fool? I never called you that, but you let them. Silence again, except this time, it hurt less, because the truth had weight, and weight had shape, and shape could finally be carried. Later that day, Eleanor took him to the tree line where the roses grew wild. I didn't plant these, she said. They started blooming 2 years after you left. Luke knelt beside them, ran his hand over the thorns. I used to leave clippings here, he said quietly, when I couldn't risk leaving a note. She blinked. That was you. I didn't think you'd know. I didn't, but I kept every one. They sat beneath the tree, the same one they carved their initials into before the war reached even the quiet parts of the world. The carving had faded, but it was still there. L plus E, 2 letters, still standing, like them. I passed through town more than once, he admitted, but I never had the courage to knock. She smiled just barely. That explains the man who bought 10 pounds of oats and paid in Canadian coins? He grinned. Didn't think you saw me. I always saw you. I just didn't believe it was real. The sun began to dip. The shadows grew long. Luke stood, walked to the fence line. You forgave me, he said, not as a question, but a statement. Eleanor didn't answer right away. Then she said, I didn't forgive you because you came back. He turned. I forgave you because you never stopped looking back. The 4th spring after he vanished, Eleanor planted sunflowers. Not because she liked them, because they were stubborn. They grew tall, even in the hardest soil. They refused to look down. They followed the sun like it was the only truth left in the sky. She watered them every morning, trimmed the dead leaves, tied the stems when they grew too heavy for their own weight. And when the blooms finally opened wide in July, she stared at them from the porch and whispered, at least something stayed. The years after Luke left didn't unravel. They calcified, slowly, quietly, one season at a time. She lost her mother first, fever in late winter, no one to fetch the doctor in time, no one to hold her hand in the final hour except Eleanor, who sat by the bedside reciting psalms she hadn't read in a decade. After the burial, the house grew quieter, colder. She filled it with chores instead of company. Then came the bank, threatening foreclosure, not for anything she did, but because the co-signed deed still had Luke's name. She fought it, alone. 3 hearings, 1 ride into the next county, 4 letters, no answer. Until finally the sheriff, Luke's replacement, signed the affidavit to release the lien. He didn't smile when she thanked him. He just said, he left more than a woman behind. After that, she stopped going to town unless she had to. People talked. Whispers floated behind her in church pews and feed lines like smoke with no fire. Still living out there alone? She's got too much pride. I heard he ran off with another woman up near Abilene. I heard he's dead. I heard she still sets a place for him at dinner. Some of it was true, some of it wasn't. But the stories didn't hurt as much as the silences, the invitations she didn't receive, the hands that stopped waving. One evening during a late summer thunderstorm, she found herself sitting in the barn, just sitting, the rain crashing around her like 100 hooves in the dark. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the beam overhead, where they had once carved a promise. L plus C, home, always. And with the back of her boot, she kicked over the feed bucket, not out of rage, but because she needed something to move. She thought of marrying once. Jacob Fisher had kind eyes, the kind that waited at the edge of your silence, patient and unbothered. He brought her extra seed in spring and once left a copy of a poetry book on her porch with a note that simply said, "In case you're still reading." He asked her once, over stew and cornbread. She told him no, not because she didn't want kindness, but because her love was still buried under the ashes of a vanished man. He understood, eventually, but he never came back. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was realizing that no one was coming to break it. Not the world, not the man, not even the version of herself that once believed love would be loud enough to bring someone home. And yet, she never left the house, never sold the land, never took off the red shawl he gave her on their last Christmas together. It hung by the door like a prayer, one she couldn't quite let go of. So when Luke came back, with lines in his face and dirt on his boots, and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen kindness in years, she didn't fall into his arms. She didn't rush to forgive. She made him sit with it, with the loss, with the version of her that had been rebuilt, not rescued. One evening after a long walk through the wheat field, they stopped near the creek. She knelt beside the water, picked up a smooth stone, and turned it in her hand. "You know what I lost waiting for you?" Luke crouched beside her, silent. "My name," she said. He blinked. "I used to be Eleanor Callahan in my mind, even before we were married, in the letters I never sent, in the way I signed flour sacks. But after 5 years, I stopped writing it." Luke reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't look at him either. "You took more than your body when you left," she said. "You took my future and left me in the past." He gripped her fingers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know." They sat by the creek until the sun disappeared, until frogs began to hum in the grass, until forgiveness didn't feel like a demand, but like a seed, buried, unsure, but maybe ready. That night she laid a second pillow on the bed. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But in the quiet, as they lay side by side with the distance of years still between them, she whispered one last thing. "I may have stopped being yours, but I never stopped being the woman you left." And he answered, "I never stopped being the man who wanted to come home." The roses had always bloomed in spite of everything. Floods, frost, even the year of the locusts, when every other plant in Sheriff had been chewed down to stalk and stem. Eleanor's roses stood like quiet survivors. She once thought it was a miracle. Now she knew better. It was Luke. She found the first grave behind the barn, marked only by a flat stone and a rusted horseshoe. It wasn't a person buried there. It was his badge, wrapped in oilcloth, tucked beneath 6 inches of dirt, left under the very ground where he once taught her how to shoot. He didn't tell her where it was, but that morning, after they walked the field together and he stopped short at the fence line, she saw it in his face. "I left something behind," he said. "You want to dig it up?" "No," he replied. "I want you to." She didn't ask why. She just went back to the house, brought a spade, and walked out alone. He waited on the porch. It took only 3 shovelfuls before the edge of the oilcloth peeked through the dirt. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. When she unwrapped the cloth and saw the tarnished badge, still shaped like a star, still heavy with silence, she sat down in the grass and stared at it for a long time. She remembered pinning it to his shirt the night he first became sheriff. How proud he looked. How afraid she was. How neither of them said what they really meant. She took the badge inside, polished it, set it on the mantel, and didn't say a word. That afternoon, they dug the second grave, not because someone had died, but because something had finally been laid to rest. 17 years of silence, 17 years of maybe. And this time, they brought flowers not as farewell, but as offering. They dug near the big oak at the edge of the field, where the sun hit longest in the day, where Eleanor used to sit and read letters she never sent. "What are we burying?" Luke asked as the hole took shape. 17 years, she said. He paused. "Are we mourning them?" She shook her head. "We're thanking them." They placed the roses into the earth, not as decoration, but as offering. Then she added the letter, the one she found in his Bible. He looked at her, alarmed. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "It's done its work." They covered the grave in silence. No cross, no stone, just a line of wildflowers laid one by one. When they finished, they stood side by side, hands dirty, hearts heavier, but somehow freer. "I spent so long resenting you," she said quietly. "I spent just as long punishing myself. Did it help? No. Did you think you deserved it?" He nodded. She touched his arm. "So did I." That night, Eleanor sat on the porch and wrote a letter of her own. She didn't address it, didn't seal it. She just wrote, "To the woman I was, you were brave. Braver than you had to be. Braver than anyone knew. You made coffee when your hands shook. You planted things when your heart had no more room to bloom. You waited, and somehow that became your war. And you won. Love me." She folded it, placed it in the drawer where she used to keep the matchsticks. And then, with steady hands, she lit a single candle and let it burn to the end. The next morning, she walked Luke out to the north field, the one with the newest bloom. The roses had multiplied. Where once there were 5 bushes, now there were nearly 30. "It happened all at once," she said. "Like forgiveness," he murmured. She looked at him, or like love coming back from the dead. They walked the rows. He stopped at one particular bush, lower than the rest but thick with buds. He reached down, picked a single rose, and handed it to her. She took it, held it like something sacred. "What now?" he asked. She smiled. "We build the fence we never finished." He blinked. "You sure?" She turned to him. "I'm not building it to keep things in anymore." He nodded slowly. "Then what?" She stepped closer. "To mark what's ours." There were no grand declarations, no ceremony, no vows. Just 2 people who had survived a war neither of them had asked for, walking back into a house that had been waiting for both of them longer than it ever should have. And still, it stood, just like them. Eleanor moved the extra pillow from the cedar chest to the bed without a word. Luke repaired the back step, whistling softly between hammer strikes. She made stew. He fixed the roof. Not because they were trying to impress each other, but because it finally felt safe to belong again. In town, people began to notice. First, the feed store clerk, who saw 2 sets of muddy boots instead of 1. Then the preacher's wife, who passed by and saw a man and woman planting together in the yard, not speaking, not smiling, just digging side by side. Eventually, someone asked Eleanor, "Is he back for good?" And she answered without hesitation, "No." They raised a brow. She smiled. "He never really left." The house changed, subtly. He moved his saddle into the barn, hung his coat by the door, started shaving again. But he didn't take over. He didn't rearrange. He just fit, like he'd always been a part of the place. Only now the walls remembered him. They didn't sleep in each other's arms the first night, or the second. But by the third, their fingers found each other between the sheets, and neither pulled away. Eleanor began to hum again, while cooking, while brushing her hair, while folding the sheets. Luke never said anything about it, but he lingered longer in the kitchen, sat closer at the table, listened, because her music was the sound of something healing, and he needed to hear it more than she needed to know. One evening, near the end of harvest, he found her sitting on the porch with a pair of boots in her lap, tiny ones, dusty with age. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. But he knew. There had been a child once, or the dream of one, something lost along the way. He sat beside her, reached out, and gently took one boot into his palm. "I wasn't the only thing you lost," he said. She nodded, eyes glassy. "Number, but you were the only thing that ever came back." Fall passed quietly. The fence got finished. The roses were trimmed. The nights grew longer but not colder, because there was fire in the hearth, and breath beside her in the bed. Then one morning, winter close on the wind, Luke returned from town with a parcel, wrapped in butcher paper. He placed it on the table. Eleanor opened it. Inside, a new tin star, polished, untarnished, but not for wearing, engraved on the back, "For the man who came home." She stared at it, then looked up at him. "I didn't want this," he said. "Not really, but I needed to prove to myself that I could hold it again, without it breaking me." She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. Then don't wear it. I won't. But hang it. Somewhere it can see us. He did. Right above the door, where sunlight always caught it first, so that each morning when they crossed the threshold, they didn't just leave the house, they stepped into the life they almost lost. Not as sheriff and sweetheart, not as what the town remembered, but as who they became. Two people who returned, not to finish a story, but to begin a truer one. The house didn't creak like it used to. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt full, because waiting had ended, not with fanfare, but with footsteps on old floorboards, and forgiveness, softly offered over coffee and shared chores. That spring, before the roses bloomed again, Eleanor stood alone by the back fence one last time. The earth was damp beneath her boots, the sky still pale with morning. In her hands she held the last letter she'd ever write to the man who didn't come home, the version of Luke she had mourned. She folded it twice, tied it with a red thread, and placed it under the roots of the newest rose bush. Not to bury the past. That spring she planted roses again, but this time not alone. And every Sunday morning, without fail, they walked out together, across the porch, past the fence, through the wildflowers, to stand before the two unmarked graves. They didn't cry, they didn't speak, they just held hands, for the 17 years they'd missed, and for every day after. One Sunday, as they stood by the twin graves, Eleanor slipped a small brass key into Luke's palm. He looked at her, puzzled. "It's for the chest under the stairs," she said. He nodded, understanding something deeper than locks and hinges. She smiled. "I used to keep it locked, just in case you came home, and I wasn't ready." "And now?" he asked. "Now I want you to open it," she said, "because you're not just back. You belong here. They say some houses wait, not for paint or repairs, not for people to come and go, but for the ones who said they'd return, and meant it." Eleanor waited through 17 winters. Luke wandered through 17 ghosts, and when they finally came back to each other, there were no fireworks, just a porch, 2 mugs, and silence that no longer hurt. So let me ask you this. If someone left you to protect you, but never stopped looking back, could you ever forgive them? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because out there, across every quiet prairie and porch swing, there's always a house that's still waiting for love. Maybe this was one of them. Maybe it still is. The snow hadn't stopped in 3 days, and still they came. One by one, horses dragging behind them, faces wrapped in wool and worry. Mothers clutched their children's hands like lifelines. Fathers didn't speak. They just nodded once, toward the cabin in the trees. The man inside didn't open the door. He didn't need to. He'd heard them before the trail even bent toward his ridge. Old instincts never died. They just got quieter. When the first knock finally came, it was small, hesitant. The door creaked open, and there he was, gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, coat stiff with cold and time. They called him the Old Wolf. Once he wore a badge. Once he cleared counties with a shotgun and a glare. Once folks cheered when he rode into town. But that was before the fire, before the grave. Now he lived alone by choice, not shame. The mother stepped forward. We need someone, just for a while." The man didn't answer. His eyes drifted down to the girl beside her. 8, maybe 9. Frost in her lashes, a ragged doll in her arms. He stepped aside and said only this, "Leave them." Then he shut the door, and the storm took the rest. The door stayed shut long after the children came in. They didn't cry, not out loud. The older ones clung to the littlest, huddled near the hearth as if fire alone could protect them from whatever world had sent them this far. Coats dripping, eyes wide, boots too big or too thin for snow like this. One boy coughed. The girl with the doll didn't blink once. And the old wolf? He stood with his back to the room, hands resting on the mantel, staring into the fire like it might speak sense into him. He offered no praise, no correction, just quiet eyes that caught everything. The kind that filled a room like smoke, slow, thick, and impossible to ignore. His cabin wasn't large. 1 room, a loft, a stove, a few hooks on the wall where a rifle used to hang. Now there was just a lantern and the cold. The man turned finally. His boots were heavy on the floorboards, but his voice, when it came, was not. "There's stew." 3 words. He ladled it without asking what they liked. Poured into tin bowls, set them on the table. 5 total. Then he sat, not with them, just near enough to hear the spoons clink against metal. They didn't talk the first night, didn't ask who he was, but they all knew. Old stories don't stay buried long in small towns, especially not when they wear hats like that. The old wolf had once been a sheriff, back when law meant something, when men rode hard and died fast, before the badge was melted down and the town stopped whispering his name like a prayer and started spitting it like a curse. But no one ever forgot what he'd done or who he'd done it for. So when the gangs came, new ones, younger, louder, no one knocked on his door. Until now. Until it was the children they feared for, not themselves. On the second day, he gave them chores, small ones. Bring in wood, sort the kindling, clean the mugs. Nothing fancy. The kids looked confused, but none of them said no. Not even the stubborn boy with the limp. Not even the little girl with the doll. By sundown, the fire was stacked twice as high, and the cabin no longer smelled like strangers. It smelled like bread and wet mittens, and something close to safety. On the third day, the questions started, from the oldest girl. "What's your name?" He didn't look up. "Wolf'll do." "That's not a name." "Nope." "Is this your cabin?" "Built it with my hands." "Why don't you live in town?" "Town stopped needing me." She paused. "Maybe not." He met her eyes then, and for the first time she saw it. Grief. Not fresh, but not healed. She didn't ask more, just nodded once, and fed the fire. That night the snow thickened. Outside, wind howled like it had teeth. Inside, 5 children slept on old quilts, curled like foxes, and the man sat by the door with a rifle across his lap. Not loaded, not yet, just ready. Old habits. By the 5th day, they started to act like they lived there. The middle boy asked if he could sharpen the knives. The youngest girl, her name was Willa, set her doll beside the window and whispered to it before bed. The boy with the limp started stacking stones outside, said he was making a wall. The wolf let him be. Sometimes silence teaches more than orders. Instead, he brought out old gloves from a crate marked hers. Didn't say whose. Didn't need to. The children put them on without asking, like they knew the cold wasn't going to wait for permission. On the 6th day, boot prints showed up on the trail. Just 1 pair, but deep, heavy, the kind made by men who don't come for coffee. The wolf saw them at dawn, didn't say a word, just tightened the strap on his coat, checked the rifle, loaded this time. He didn't tell the children. Not yet. They were still learning to sleep without flinching, and he wasn't about to take that from them. That night, he sat closer to the fire, let the warmth reach his hands. The children played a quiet game of stones in the corner. Laughing once. He let it happen. Didn't smile, but didn't stop them either. He looked at Willa. She was asleep, doll tucked under her chin, and for the first time in a long, long time. He wasn't alone in the cabin. By the 7th day, they called it home, and by the 8th, the gang made the worst mistake of their lives. They didn't go after the town. They came for the cabin, and they forgot one simple thing. You can threaten a man. You can burn his house. You can break his past. But when you threaten the only good thing he has left, the old wolf remembers how to kill. The wolf didn't sleep much after the prince. Old eyes didn't see as far anymore, but they knew what mattered. A man who walks straight through a snowstorm doesn't visit. He follows something, or someone, and that meant time was running out. At sunrise, he brought down the crate, the one from the loft, the one the children weren't supposed to see. It was long, dusty, heavy. He laid it on the table and opened the lid with fingers that didn't tremble, but didn't feel steady either. Inside, a rifle wrapped in oilcloth, a belt of bullets that hadn't been touched in years, and a badge, bent, blackened. His fingers hovered, but the badge stayed where it was. Then closed the lid. The boy with the limp, Eli, stood in the doorway. You were really a sheriff? The wolf didn't turn. Long time ago. Why'd you quit? He shrugged. I didn't. Then what happened? Too much. Eli didn't ask more, but he didn't leave either. Can you teach me how to shoot? The wolf turned at that, looked the boy over. Thin arms, wide eyes, boots that didn't fit. No, Eli frowned. But I'll teach you how to stand, the wolf added. That day the cabin changed. Not in size, but in stance. The table was moved, the windows checked, the latch on the back door oiled. Every sound, every nail, every creak was marked and remembered. The wolf worked in silence, but the children watched and learned. They didn't ask where he went when he disappeared behind the trees for an hour. They didn't question why he sharpened every knife, even the butter one. But when he came back, boots crusted in frost and eyes like flint, they said nothing, just handed him a cup of broth and sat beside him. The next morning he gave each child a task, not chores, missions. You, he said to the oldest girl, Clara, your fire watch. Keep the flame steady. No smoke. She nodded. To you, he said to Eli, look for light. Any flicker out the trees. Tell me fast. The youngest, Willa, blinked up at him. He crouched low. You stay near the stove, always, and keep that doll where you can find it. She nodded hard, solemn. And if anything happens, he added, you blow this. He handed her a small tin whistle, bent, old. Her fingers curled around it like it was made of gold. That night, the wolf sat on the front steps, rifle across his knees, snow falling quiet. He didn't speak, didn't move, but something inside him had woken up. Not rage, not revenge, just clarity. Some men needed a reason to live. He'd found 5. The next day, he set up trip lines, crude wire tied to bells, rusted tin pans along the fence posts. He carved notches into trees, not for art, for range. The children watched. Eli followed him for half a mile once before the wolf turned and said, step louder. No man trusts a ghost he can't hear coming. Why not? Eli asked. Because it means he's already dead. The boy didn't understand, but he listened, and that mattered more. On the 5th morning, the girl Clara brought him a folded paper. A plan, she said. It was a drawing. Crooked lines, boxes, marks. This is the cabin, she pointed. This is where we stack firewood. Here's the trail where you saw the prints. He stared at it. You made this? She nodded. We thought it might help. The wolf didn't smile, but he patted her shoulder, and that was more than thanks. It was trust. That night he lit the lantern early, hung it by the front post. A warning, or maybe an invitation. Some ghosts weren't meant to haunt, they were meant to guard, and this one had claws again. The next morning the wind shifted, carried smoke from the south. Not fire, not yet, but campfire smoke. Men nearby, too near. The wolf sniffed once, tightened the scarf around his neck, looked to the children still asleep by the stove, and made a decision. No more hiding, no more waiting. He was done watching the fire from a distance. He opened the crate again, pulled the rifle free, loaded 6 rounds, hung the badge on a nail, not to wear, but to remember, because this wasn't justice. This was protection, and he wasn't doing it for the law. He was doing it for the girl who talked in her sleep, for the boy who built stone walls for fun, for the one who carved maps, and for the doll sitting on the windowsill, facing east like it could spot danger before the sun rose. The wolf stood in the doorway, snow falling like ash, the wind howling like a memory, and he whispered to no one, "Come if you're coming." The storm didn't come all at once, not like the others. This one built slow, like a breath drawn and held too long. The snow fell steady, no wind, no thunder. Just that thick, unbearable quiet. Even the birds stopped. Even the trees listened. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled like it knew something the rest of them didn't. And the children? They waited, but not like before. Willa no longer clung to her doll like it could fight for her. Now she tucked it beneath the quilt before sleep, like she was the one doing the protecting. Eli stopped limping when he thought no one was looking. He stacked the stones higher now, not because he thought they'd stop bullets, but because it gave his hands something to do while his mind sorted through fear. Clara whispered less, watched more. She stayed near the fire, not out of comfort, but because she'd memorized the smoke patterns and could spot when they shifted with the wind. Each child had changed, not loud, not fast, but like iron in the flame, reshaped without losing what it was. The wolf watched it all, from the corner, from the porch, from behind the steam of his morning coffee. He stayed silent, but the shift in his stance was answer enough. And prepared. More wire, more markers. An axe laid near the door, not for wood. This wasn't survival anymore. It was defense. On the fourth day of waiting, Clara asked, "How many do you think there are?" The wolf didn't look up from his map. 5, maybe 6. "You've handled more?" He nodded once. "Back then." Clara pressed her lips together. "This isn't back then." "No," he said. "It's worse." She didn't ask why. But later that night, she cleaned every mug, set them on the shelf, and checked the lock on the door twice before bed. They practiced silence after dinner. 1 hour, no talking, no movement, just breath and listening. The wolf called it storm posture, not because it helped the weather, but because stillness made men into walls, and sometimes walls were what held, even when men didn't. Eli found a dog one morning, half-starved, limping, barely fur and ribs. He brought it back wrapped in a sack. "Won't bark," he said. "I promise." The wolf didn't scold, didn't even raise a brow. He just gave the boy a blanket and said, "Keep it fed." The dog slept by the door that night and didn't make a sound, but its eyes watched the trees like it remembered things no one else could. The firewood pile grew, not just from the wolf. The kids took turns now, axing, splitting, hauling. Clara wrote names on the logs in chalk, one for each person in the house. It made the fire feel personal, like they were burning fear, not just pine. One evening, the wolf came in holding a bird, dead, but perfect. He laid it on the table, feathers soft and untouched. "What is it?" Willa asked. "Blue jay." "Why'd you bring it inside?" He looked at her. "Because even something that dies in silence deserves to be noticed." She nodded slowly, then drew the bird in charcoal, hung the drawing by the door, next to the badge. The next morning the snow stopped, just like that. Clear sky, hard ground, the air sharp as a broken bottle. The waiting was over, but the fear, that stayed. Quiet now, tight. Clara noticed first. Tracks, not from boots but horses, 6 of them. North Trail, deep, recent. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just walked into the cabin, handed the wolf a slip of paper with a single word. "They're close." He read it, folded it, placed it in his coat, then looked up at all 5 children and said the first full sentence he'd said in days. "It's time." That night, no one slept. The fire burned low. The dog didn't blink. The wolf oiled his rifle twice, laid 2 extra lanterns near the stairs, and for the first time since they'd come, he gave each child a hug. Brief, rough, but real. He whispered something into each of their ears. No one told the others what he said, but Willa didn't need to sleep with her doll that night, and Eli stopped stacking stones. And Clara sat with her back straight, eyes steady, because the waiting had taught them something the world never had. You don't need to be loud to be ready, you just need to hold. The days that followed were quieter, but not calmer. The storm wasn't just in the sky anymore. The prints were deep, not from weight, but from purpose. 6 horses, 2 riders per mount maybe. Men who didn't ride for scenery. They weren't scouts. They weren't merchants. They were coming for something, or someone, with every intention of taking it. The wolf studied the trail before the sun broke fully over the pines. The trees were silent. So was the wind. He crouched, gloved fingers brushing the packed snow where hooves had crushed it just hours earlier. "Too close," he muttered to no one. Then he rose, slower than he used to, but still like a man with purpose, and walked back up the ridge to the cabin. The sky was pale blue, the air dry and tense. The kind of air that held its breath before something broke. Inside the cabin, 5 children were already dressed. They had stopped waiting to be told what to do. Now they just waited to do it. He shut the door behind him with a firm click. "They'll be here by nightfall," he said. No one cried, not anymore. Instead, Clara stood from the table, folded the hand-drawn map she'd updated every morning, and handed it to him. They split. 2 on the ridge, 4 up the creek path. Right? He scanned the pencil marks, nodded. "Looks like." "Then we'll block the ridge," Eli said, limping only slightly now. "I stacked rocks where you showed me. They'll trip." The wolf looked at him. "You did that?" The boy shrugged. "Didn't want to die lazy." The wolf almost smiled. Almost. The rest of the day passed without sound. Not silence, soundless discipline. The cabin moved like a machine. Willa packed food into bags, 1 for each child. She tied the string with steady fingers. The twins, silent, sharp-eyed, hid lanterns at marked points in the trees, wrapped in cloth to keep them from glinting. Eli sharpened wood into stakes, not to fight, to signal, to mark, to slow them down. And the wolf? He knelt at the edge of the creek, dipped a leather canteen into the icy flow, and whispered something into the water. A name, one no one else heard. By mid-afternoon, he returned to the cabin and opened the floorboard beneath the stove. Inside, a wooden box, buried in sawdust and soot. He hadn't touched it in years. He set it on the table, removed the lid. Clara leaned over to look. It wasn't a weapon. It was a coat, deep brown, worn soft at the edges. A single silver star stitched to the inside, hidden from view. "Yours?" she asked. He nodded. "You going to wear it?" He stared at it a long while, then slowly, deliberately slipped it on. It didn't fit like it used to, but it still felt like truth. As the sun began to bleed behind the trees, the sky turned to iron. He walked the perimeter one last time. The traps were set, trip lines strung low, glass shards placed beneath thin snowbanks, barrels turned on their sides filled with stones to echo footsteps. He had no men, no deputies, but he had terrain, and he had purpose. Sometimes that was more than enough. Dusk came fast. The cabin darkened. The fire burned low on purpose now. No smoke to betray its warmth. The children gathered near the center, backs to one another, eyes on the windows. The dog, still unnamed, lay flat against the door, ears twitching. The wolf stood beside the window, rifle in hand, badge inside the coat. Waiting, not to strike, to choose when. Because this wasn't a fight for glory. This was a line drawn in frost, and he would not let them cross it. The first sound was a crack, barely audible, a snapped twig far off, then a second, closer, then silence again. But this time it was the kind of silence that answered back. He turned to the children, whispered, "Positions!" They moved. Willa slipped behind the stove, her whistle on a string. Clara ducked into the back pantry, a mirror angled to reflect the side path. Eli crouched by the wall, a loaded slingshot in hand, not to harm but to signal. The others huddled beneath blankets, silent, still, alert. He moved to the door, opened it an inch. Snow fell light now, software almost gentle, but the darkness beyond it was thick. He listened, then stepped out. He made it 5 feet before the dog growled low. Then, voices, distant. "You sure this is it? Cabin's right there." "How many inside?" "Just the old man, maybe some rats." The wolf crouched behind the woodpile, eyes narrowed. 4 men approached, slow, loose, overconfident, the kind who think they've won before they've bled. One held a lantern, the rest carried rifles. None moved with caution. That was their first mistake. He waited until they reached the second trip wire, then whistled once. Not loud, not sharp, just once. Eli heard it inside. Fired the slingshot. A rock hit the bell strung on the far post. The gang turned, disoriented, and the wolf moved. Not fast, not reckless, just true. The first shot took out the lantern. The second, the leg of the lead man. The third wasn't needed, because by then, the forest itself had turned against them. Lanterns flared from behind. Clara's positioning. The light blinded them. They scattered, panicked. One ran straight into the wire Eli had strung with broken tin, screamed as his ankle twisted hard. The dog leapt from the shadows, barking once, enough to paralyze one man with fear, and from behind them, the wolf walked slowly, rifle raised, every step deliberate. "You picked the wrong ridge," he said. His voice was calm, dead calm. "Now drop your guns." Two obeyed, one didn't. He raised his weapon, and before the click even sounded, the wolf fired, a single round, through the wrist. The gun dropped. The man fell, and the silence returned. But this time, it belonged to him. He walked the cabin perimeter once more before turning back. The men groaned in the snow, wounded but breathing, alive, because killing wasn't the point. Stopping was. Inside, the children hadn't moved. Not one cry, not one shout, just eyes wide and unblinking. The wolf stepped in, removed his coat, and said only this: "It's over." Clara approached him first. "You didn't miss." He raised an eyebrow. "Ever?" He paused. "Once." She waited. "My wife." No one spoke for a long time. Then Willa crossed the floor, wrapped her arms around his leg. Didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because in that cabin, buried in snow, surrounded by pain, held together by silence, they had become something rare, not just safe, not just alive. A family. They came just before dawn, not scouts this time, not boys playing outlaw in borrowed coats. These were killers, 6 of them, faces hidden, horses silent. One carried a torch, another a rope. The rest rifles strapped tight like they didn't expect to miss. They hadn't come to threaten. They'd come to finish what the first group couldn't start. And this time, they knew exactly what they were walking into, or so they thought. The wolf had been awake since midnight, didn't sleep much anymore, not since the snow started whispering. He sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, coat draped over his shoulders like armor. He knew they were coming, not from tracks, not from scouts, but from a gut feeling that had never lied to him. Not when his deputy bled out in his arms 15 years ago, not when he left the badge behind, and not when he let those children through his door. And when a man like him knows, he doesn't pray. He prepares. Inside, the children were quiet, not scared, set, like arrows notched and ready. Eli crouched behind the side table, stones lined up in his palm. Clara stood near the pantry door, knife in hand, breath controlled, steady. The twins, silent as shadow, sat with the dog between them, hand on fur, ears tuned to every step outside. Willa stayed where she'd been told, behind the stove, doll in one hand, whistle in the other. No questions, only breath. The first noise came low, a thud, then another. Boots on snow, then wood creaked. A trap tripped, a startled grunt. The wolf rose slowly, stepped off the porch, walked 10 feet out. The cold wrapped around him like an old coat. Familiar, inevitable. "Back again," he called out. No response. Then, "Where are they?" The voice was harsh, young, confident, too confident. His eyes held the answer. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled something out. Not the rifle, not the badge. A strip of leather, frayed and faded. He tossed it into the snow. They didn't understand. He didn't need them to. They approached from 3 sides. One man stayed back, overwatch. 2 moved left, toward the stacked logs. 3 walked directly up the trail. The cabin didn't flinch. The wolf stood still. "You can leave now," he said calmly. "No one has to get hurt." A laugh. "You ain't killing 6 of us, old man." "I'm not aiming to." Another step. Another mistake. He raised his rifle. Fired once. The lead man dropped, legs shot clean, screamed into the pine air. The others scattered. The second walked straight into the bell wire trap. Gun flailed, went off. Hit nothing but tree bark. Inside the cabin, the dog barked once. Then silence again. The wolf moved like memory. Fast, deliberate, unforgiving. 2 more shots, both at the ground. One ricocheted, on purpose. The men ducked. He vanished behind the shed. Now the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. That made them nervous. One man ran toward the back. Big mistake. Clara was waiting. She didn't strike. She threw powder, ash, and flour right into his face as he entered the side hallway. He screamed, blind, dropped his gun. Eli took it, didn't fire, just unloaded it with shaking hands, then threw it into the snow. At the front, the torchman reached the porch, raised fire toward the eaves. The wolf stepped from the trees and said softly, "You light that, I'll bury you where you stand." The man hesitated, then smiled, swung the torch toward the roof. The shot hit his hand. The torch dropped. Snow hissed, steam rose, and the man screamed louder than the wind. The last one, Overwatch, stood frozen behind a pine. He didn't run, didn't speak, watched the whole thing, watched his crew fall to confusion, not bullets. Watched the old man pick them off one by one, not with death, but with control. He lowered his gun, dropped it into the snow, raised his hands, and when the wolf saw him, he only said, "Smartest one of the lot," then turned back to the cabin. Inside, the children were still in position, eyes wide, hands trembling, but they hadn't screamed, hadn't scattered. They had held, and in that silence, after the last echo faded and the snow began falling soft again, something shifted. Not in the world, in them, in him. Willa stood slowly, walked across the room, climbed into the wolf's arms, didn't ask, didn't speak, just was there. He lowered himself to the ground and let her stay. By midday, the remaining men were bound and set near the trail, alive, bitter, but breathing. The wolf hadn't taken their lives. He'd taken their pride. And in their world, that cut deeper. When the sheriff from town finally came riding, 2 deputies behind, all of them late by hours, he looked at the tied men, then at the children, then at the man who once wore the same star now stitched inside his coat. "You did this?" the sheriff asked. The wolf just looked at the children, then back at the man. "No," he said. "We did." That night the cabin was warm again, the windows closed, the fire high, and the children sat close, not out of fear, out of belonging. The wolf didn't tell them stories, didn't give speeches. He just sat on the porch, coat draped across his shoulders, watching the snow fall like it hadn't seen blood that morning. And when Willa came out and curled beside him, he didn't move, just let her rest. And for the first time in years, he spoke to someone who stayed. "Did good, girl." She leaned her head against him. "You too, Sheriff." And he let the word hang. Sometimes silence is permission. He stood by the window long after the fire had gone out. Tomorrow would not ask who he used to be. It would demand who he had become. They didn't build a statue for him, didn't throw a parade, didn't carve his name into the side of the church or hammer it onto a signpost at the town's edge. No one gave speeches. No one cried in public. But every door stayed unlocked that week, and no one, not even the bitter, not even the frightened, questioned why 5 children slept safer under his roof than they ever had in their own homes. Because some names don't need stone to last. Some names live in what never came to pass. The fire that never touched the roof. The bullet that never reached the child. The gang that never made it down the hill. That was his legacy, and he never asked for it. The sheriff came again, this time without his badge. He stood outside the cabin, hat in hand, waiting. Didn't knock, didn't shout. The door opened anyway. The wolf stood in the frame, arms crossed, eyes colder than frostbite. "Come to finish what the last one didn't?" The sheriff shook his head. "I came to ask." "Ask what?" "If you're ready." The wolf didn't answer, didn't need to. He stepped aside, let the man enter, and that, for him, was louder than yes. The children weren't leaving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The town had offered homes, sure, beds, blankets, familiar names. But none of them said what mattered. None of them said, "You are safe here." The wolf had never said it either. But they knew. Every whistle strung over a fence. Every stone set to trip a boot. Every spoon of stew stirred at sunrise. They knew. And that knowing, It was the only home that counted. Spring came late that year. The snow melted in slow sighs, leaving behind crushed pine and packed earth. Clara took to rebuilding the garden, small, rough rows of beans and potatoes. Eli fixed the roof with wood he cut himself. The dog had a name now, Flint. Willa fed him every morning, humming something soft and wordless. And the wolf? He didn't speak more. He just stayed. And for people like him, that was everything. One morning, Clara sat beside him on the porch. "You ever going back?" He didn't look at her. "Back where?" "To the badge." He shook his head once. "It never fit right." She nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe it does now." He didn't reply, but his hand rested on the inside of his coat, where the star still lived. Worn, bent, but still bright enough. On a Sunday, they went into town, all six, walking slow, no fanfare, just dust, leather, and silence. The townsfolk watched from behind shop windows and porch posts, eyes wary. Then, one by one, doors opened. June from the bakery brought bread. The blacksmith's boy waved. The preacher nodded, and the children held their heads high, not in defiance, in presence. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were the story now. At the general store, Willa stopped, pointed at a chair on the porch. Not for herself, for the wolf. He shook his head. "I've stood long enough." She tugged his hand gently. "Then sit beside me." And for the first time in years he did, not to guard, not to watch. Just to be. That night back at the cabin, Clara opened an old notebook. Handmade, leather cover, worn edges. She passed it to him. "What's this?" "Your story." He blinked. "What for?" "For the next ones." He stared at the cover. Didn't open it. Didn't have to. Just whispered, "You're the story." She smiled. "We all are." In the morning, the wolf walked to the tree behind the cabin, the one that never lost its leaves. He carved something into the bark. Slow, deep strokes. Not his name, not a warning, just a single word. Home, then turned back. The porch faced east now, to catch the light earlier. The children sat waiting. Flint wagged his tail, and the wolf stepped onto the porch, slower now but firm. Willa looked up. "Will we always stay here?" He didn't answer with words, just sat beside her. And when the sun rose, he didn't look away. He never said much, didn't promise to protect, didn't ask for thanks. But when 5 scared children stood on his porch, he didn't turn them away. He just opened the door and stayed. Maybe that's what real strength looks like. Not in the gun you fire or the badge you wear, but in the people who sleep safely under your roof because you chose to stay when others ran. The old wolf didn't return to town for glory. He didn't fight to be remembered, but now they remember him anyway. In every unlocked door, in every quiet breath, in every child who learned to wait without fear. And maybe you've known someone like him, a man who never asked to be the hero, a woman who stayed when no one else did, someone who became your shelter. Tell us in the comments, who was your old wolf? What would you guard, even if the whole world walked away? Because sometimes, the ones who say the least leave behind the most.